Oh, awesome. Right. This is nice. Just to have a sit down, pressure free. I call these. I like to think of having a. I talk when I'm on my own. I talk about riffing on stuff. So like, or having a jam. So it feels like that, man. Just having a jam on the topic of bypassing and the different things that that might mean to people. Because it's a. I don't know about you, but it seems to be a bit of a buzzword at the moment in my world. Anyway, a lot of people seem to be talking about it. Is that true for you as well?
Yeah, in different ways. So I feel like it largely depends on the context, but I mean, there's within my work in spiritual counseling, there's anything from, um, considering bypassing as a way of talking about the avoidance patterns that we might be caught up in our own stuff, like participating in certain behaviors or um, ways of viewing ourselves in the world as a way of trying to feel safe or secure, um, from a sense of inadequacy or a sense of not being in control, something like that. So bypassing through behavior is, a huge part of the kind of thing that I'm exploring with people. But there's also bypassing in other contexts of like using spirituality to avoid feeling emotion, to
Yeah.
avoid honoring, you know, the tenderness that comes with being human
Yeah.
by default, the vulnerability that comes with being human. So,
Yeah. Yeah. This term, spiritual bypassing. I hear that a lot. And then, of course, when we were talking, there's also and you pointed towards this, the potentially kind of bypassing, you know, something on the psychological. I'm trying to find the right word for it. I don't know what the right
mhm.
word is. I've heard it called a carousel before, like that kind of,
Uh-huh.
and that kind of makes sense to me. Yeah, well, because it feels to me like for some of the people that I've worked with, there is a fear that, golly, if I don't do the work in air quotes, if I don't uncover why something is a certain way, why the pattern's there, experience it, feel it, then it's gonna be there, and I'm gonna be beholden to it, and and there's this real worry, um, that in looking in a different direction, in looking towards who we are. I don't know if I really like this phrasing, but before and beyond our psychology, if you like, the
Mhm.
truth of us. That, oh, but am I not bypassing? Am I ignoring something that I need to go into? Um, for me, it's kind of like the way I kind of look at it is, well, is there a sweet spot? Because the pendulum for a lot of people swings from completely innocently at their level of understanding, not knowing that it's safe to experience their human experience, and so maybe they're drinking or using drugs in order to kind of innocently move away from that because they don't know it's safe to experience it. And then in a way, it's like the pendulum swings the other way, and then there can be kind of like like an identification with these experiences, often that happened a long, long time ago, and it can almost kind of make them concrete. And the thing that I'm kind of always trying to point towards is this sweet spot where we're not denying anything, and we're also not over identifying with it either. um and kind of, I don't know if there's any way that anyone can kind of teach that necessarily. It's kind of something that we have to see for ourselves, but that's kind of what I'd love for people. That's the kind of the thing that I'd love people to come to see for themselves, is that yes, we're gonna continue to have a human experience, and this body mind, of course, is going to get its knocks and its scrapes, and it's going to feel stuff. But that doesn't mean that we're not free, and it doesn't mean that we can't have beautifully rich experience of life. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything in that that I don't, do you see it like that, or do you see it slightly differently? I'd love to know.
I think my perspective on bypassing just everything that you mentioned is fairly multifaceted. I can look at it from different angles.
Mhm.
Um, so everything that you said resonates, and I feel like that's within the practical everyday um, exploration of these patterns and the way that we're relating to them, avoiding them, identifying with them,
Mhm.
um, engaging with them, not engaging with them. It's it does come to this, finding what this sweet spot that you're talking about is. It's a felt kind of intuition that over time, um, through just trial and error practice and the way that this process opens us up and um, something we get a clear felt knowing about. It just takes the time it takes.
Yeah.
But I also think that the first thing that came up for me as I was listening to you initially talk about this concern is that to me it sounds like, well, the first thing that I would be interested in if someone came to me and presented this issue of, I'm worried that, I need to look at all this, these historical uh, traumas and patterns and all my shadows, all
Mm.
these identities, these ways of being, or else, right? It's this conditional way of framing this aspect of the process, which is um, a integral part of it. This exploring emotional textures and beliefs and identities, but the the urgency and the nervousness, the kind of conditional anxiety of, if I don't blank,
Mm.
then blank will happen, or this means blank about me, right? Is to me points to a some sort of fixation around control and vulnerability, because it's a lot of pressure that this individual would be putting on themselves of, if I don't do X, Y, and Z, then something bad will happen, or it means something about me. And I think that although it's an understandable position to take, I'm sure I've said the same kind of thing in my own process. Maybe I will tomorrow, who knows? But I think what that way of relating to one's own process indicates to me is more that there's a fear of being vulnerable within the process, and that there's a lack of trust in the process. Because from my own experience, it's not something that we're doing really. It's
Yeah.
being done through us.
Yeah.
And it's really the work to do, right, is primarily around openness and willingness, right? Being honest with ourselves and having the soil be fertile for the quote unquote outcomes that we're looking for or hoping for, right? It's taking care of it. Yeah, it's more about how we're holding the process in our mind rather than, making sure that all the patterns in this category are checked off before we move on to the next thing. And it's like looking at like some sort of um it's not a linear thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would be more curious about um I guess exploring the fears around, what if it doesn't, right? What if we don't look at this, thing that happened when I was 4 or whatever, right? What if I don't look at why I'm frustrated at the cashier in the grocery store?
Mm,
What does that mean about me? What's so bad about why is that a damning circumstance? Not to say that that isn't something that warrants looking into. That's not what I'm saying. It's more about what is that urgency, that anxiety really about? And what is it trying to do? Because a
mm,
lot of these fixations serve to just reinforce that victim that can't do it right, rather than actually indicating that there's a problem that we need to consider.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a few things that have appeared as you were sharing that, and it's interesting, like like you pointed towards it, Bo. You said I can't remember your exact words, but if the pattern is a form of, I can't be happy until XYZ has
Mm,
been dealt with, or perhaps it's a flavor of, or I'll be happy once I've been through this. I've got a lot of work to do is something that I hear a lot.
mm,
Is a phrase that I hear a lot, and it looks to me like one that completely innocently, one of the kind of core assumptions in there is that I'm not whole and complete now.
mm,
There's some kind of process that I need to go through before that's the case. And then on top of that, if someone sees that it's their job to do that, and they create this separate self that has to do the processing or has to go on the journey, then that's a lot of pressure, like you said, and also potentially a full time job. Like
mhm.
golly, it's 3 p.m. now. I best get back to it. I best guess back. I best get back to work. Um, and so yeah, I see that. I can see how that could just feed on itself, and and I love what you said about like what if it doesn't. I mean, we talk about bypassing as in it's kind of um offered up as like a negative thing that we like. If you bypass, if you don't look at something, then you're making a mistake, or you haven't done all the work, or whatever it might be. But how long do we have to look in a certain direction? Or how long do we have to kind of traverse a
Mm,
certain terrain? Like, at what point do we actually hit? And I don't, I am definitely, I think for a lot of people, certain work or intervention has been very, very helpful and has been very powerful. Um, but like you say, like what if something isn't worked through? What does that mean? You know, does that mean that, oh, well, that means I can't be free, or that means that, what is it that? So yeah, I really see that. That makes total sense to me. The what you're sharing there, and
I feel like for so many of these kinds of um, concerns or preoccupations, it is more of a nuanced both and
mhm,
kind of situation, right? Because that is, and both and situations are very uncomfortable for the mind to hold. So it's understandable that it's not as maybe in that moment of panic and anxiety, not as easy to kind of acknowledge or to access. Um, but the it really is like it's funny. I kind of think of it sometimes as a river, right? So the process is the flowing of the river, right? So there is movement. There is a progression that isn't necessarily linear or personal, but there is movement. There is an unfolding, right? To say that there isn't would be a different kind of bypassing, I would say. Um, and the fact that the river is water is always accessible, no matter
mm,
how far along the bank you go, right? The fact that the journey itself is composed of this inherent wholeness, completeness, and it is in fact the journey that is exploring itself. That process itself is what's here, rather than a leaf that's bobbing up and down along the river that needs to get to a certain bank in order to whatever be on the on the river effectively, right? It's so it is worthwhile to look into, you know, what am I holding on to about this particular situation? What am I believing to be true? What am I avoiding? What lens, what point of view am I kind of viewing this, relating to this through and from, right? That's that's worthwhile always. But that doesn't mean just because there is a mode of exploration that's being offered by life, just because there's this invitation there of, hey, is that true? Look here, look closer at this. That it doesn't mean that recognizing that that is wholeness expressing that way, that it's wholeness itself that is engaging in the process, right? For itself, through itself, that is somehow inaccessible or out of reach. So it's the assumption of this conditionality, right? Of I need to do this or else, or to get to a certain point, is overlooking that truth is accessible in every moment.
yeah,
It's accessible in every aspect of the process. And the fact that there is an unfolding doesn't um, diminish that. or dismiss that, the always availableness of what we are,
Mm.
and the always availableness of that recognition of what we are. So um, I think it's one thing to say, well, is it really worthwhile to look at why I keep on yelling at my partner, right? It's like that's not what I'm saying.
Got it.
if if the pattern that we're caught up in, right, is resulting in um, maladaptive or um, separation based behavior like aggression, right? I'm not suggesting that we don't have to look at that. If you want to have a nice time with your partner, right? If you want to have a successful marriage or relationship, it would be worthwhile to look at that closer.
Mm.
But the maybe there's a hesitation that arises in that circumstance, a hesitation in looking closer at why am I yelling at my partner, or a hesitation of um, I kind of like this identity of there shouldn't be difficult things in life. There should only be positive things. I kind of like having that view, and that reluctance there, is uncomfortable, but there's also this sense of like righteousness there. It's okay if there is an attachment that's arising that you're aware of, that you're also hesitant to inquire into, to investigate. It's okay that that's there. And we owe it to ourselves and our loved ones to take life's hint if it keeps arising. It's that I often find within my own process and in working with people that it's the persistence, the reoccurrence of a given pattern, of a given frustration, of a given um, point of distance, right? That's part of life's invitation of, hey, you're in the place to see through this, to work through this. How do I know? It keeps on coming up. Keep on giving it to you. Keep on bringing it into awareness, right? And that's where um, the kind of framing of accountability comes into play. But just because we might feel apprehensive in looking into something, it doesn't mean anything about what we are. It just means that we're feeling apprehensive about something. That's it. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated or, um, fraught with guilt and shame than just this is the situation, right? The process actually moves more effectively if we don't add all these layers on top of it of, you know, my hesitation to look at this identity means this, that, and the other thing about me, and getting caught in that loop. That the getting caught up in the loop is actually part of, you know, ego sneakiness of just reinforcing the belief in separation within that circumstance, you know? So it's, um, but it takes time. Like we said at the beginning, there develops this kind of felt intuition of what is the way that I'm relating to this experience. Um, what's the true aspect of it and what's the distorted aspect of it? What's an invitation and what's avoidance, right? It's this it takes time, and like any process, what's required is just compassion and patience, and a gentleness, right? It's okay. It's okay if we're just having a tough time and would rather, watch TV than look closer at a frustration that's coming up. That's fine.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
It's allowed.
It's
Yeah.
allowed.
Yeah. And it's like being able to, it's funny because I've sometimes said, and because it in from one perspective, it it takes time in the sense that, someone might say, well, it took me 6 months to work through my whatever about my relationship or whatever it might be. But it from and so that's true from one perspective, and from another perspective it looks like it takes insights, and those insights happen to come when they come. Life catches sight of things when it does, as and us, that's who we are, of course. And so then we say, well, it took me 6 months, but ultimately, for example, someone, I think something wonderful come when life comes to see that, oh, this idea of this separate self that did all this, that got itself in a mess, and that I'm responsible for all this. The moment that that's realized as, well, that, like, to see through that and to realize that it's not personal in that way. Your body mind has been doing what makes sense based on its level of understanding, if you like, systemically. And so if it's reaching for a packet of Doritos and turning on Netflix on a Friday night, like, at that level of how you were seeing things, like, it's wisdom, right? And then we have an insight, and we realize, and we start, I say we have an insight, it makes it sound, it's like life just sees something more clearly in it, and we get moved in a different way. It's really hard to have these conversations without ending up talking about, like, uh we have to, I guess we have to use language, so it's very easy to start to make it sound like there's a doer,
Mm.
that there's a Sam here that's kind of doing it and making it all happen. But just to see through that, and to kind of have a release of that pressure that there's something wrong with us, and that we did it, and that I'm not I don't know if I'm sort of expressing this very well in this moment, but just the seeing through of that, the seeing through of that illusion, and coming to see like, that it's a movement, that it's a movement, and that life is just living itself, and it happens to have been living itself in and showing up in whatever way it's showing up, until it shows up in a different way, or an insight comes, or we see through something, or we see through this idea, or we no longer identify with this idea, that, you know or the belief, or whatever it is, and suddenly it looks different to us. But yeah, there's nothing, like, we're all innocent in everything we've ever done.
Absolutely.
And that is at the core of this for me, is to see that, and then it allows us to just see through the layers of judgment that we often pour on top. um yeah.
I think a helpful way of um, framing this that takes some of the bite out of it, that we often habitually feel compelled and obligated to put on top of this unfolding because of viewing it initially from this belief in separation from self-centeredness is that, this process, living from the truth of what we are, is really and truly a movement of nature.
Yeah.
It's not actually different than the changing of the seasons.
Mm.
It's not actually different to the cycle of, plant growth, or um, the natural filtration process that rainwater moves through in its cycles. Um, this is the way that life naturally moves through the human expression. And there's a whole spectrum with that. But really every movement of human life is kind of moving in accordance to this natural tendency that life has. And I think in viewing it that way, and it's not even that I'm offering some kind of, I don't know, abstract hypothetical. I'm talking about something very just matter of fact, like I'm just describing gravity.
Mm.
It's exactly the same. It's this movement of from the belief in separation to the wholeness that's always been there, as the wholeness that's always been there, is a movement of nature. It's a natural way that this human expression moves and evolves. And therefore, it warrants the same kind of gentleness and uh, kind of appreciation and framing of innocence, like you were describing, as, moving from fall to winter with trees, right? It's like you wouldn't, you wouldn't, come. So I'm aware that with talking about months, it's dependent on where you are. I live in the U.S. and Pennsylvania, so the the trees are bare of leaves, um, closer to like end of December, beginning of January, and it's not like anyone would view that process of like they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong.
Why didn't they?
How dare they?
Exactly, like this, that storm that happened in May, like where is that in this process?
Mm.
What, why is that not being accounted for? It's like, no, it's just the way that the seasons moved prior to a leaf falling from a branch, right? That was all part of it, and doesn't define that movement in the same way of, like you often say, you can't get this wrong.
No, yeah. You can't mess this one up.
Yeah, he can't mess this up. And so
Yeah.
we can trust that there's a kind of refuge, a kind of solace that we can take and find within ourself, that in knowing that, in trusting that, this is all for itself. Um,
Mm.
no matter how it looks, no matter how it feels. And I mean, well, the mind might come in and say, well, how do I know that? Well, there's only itself. That's how we know. There's only this. There's only being, right? That there's only wholeness. So there's nothing outside of wholeness that could then
Yeah.
be the exception of it's all for itself. There's only itself. There's only life. And so at every moment, this word right now, the particular sound, um, tonality of this voice, the temperature in the room, the experience of the colors and shapes, this present moment is precisely as it needs to be. How do we know? It's what is,
Yeah.
right?
It's inevitable, right? Can't
And it doesn't mean, you know, that uh, prior to this call, I was reflecting and realized that, I haven't drank water today. I've only drank tea, right? So that doesn't mean anything other than, okay, there was that discrepancy. Maybe in acknowledging that, I'll, make a point to drink water later today or something. I just mean that however life has moved up until this point is exactly as it needed to. And just because from a particular perspective, we may notice a discrepancy or recognize something as skillful or unskillful, right? Doesn't mean anything about the process and the isness of the process. It doesn't mean anything about you with a capital Y. Um, it's just how life is exploring itself right now. And that's okay. It's this back and forth, right? We're ready and open and available to recognize a particular aspect of life's invitations when we are, right? It's the way that this process moves is exactly as it needs to and wants to through this expression. It's a joy that we're even able to, right? Most people don't care about this. They don't find any interest in this. They don't find this compelling. They don't take life's invitation. Or more truthfully, life's invitation expresses in a different way for
Sure.
them and unfolds in a different way for them.
Mm.
It's like I said earlier, it's all the same invitation. It's just on a spectrum of how it opens up. Like different flowers bloom in different ways and at different points in the season. It doesn't mean that there's actually a value judgment there. It's
Yeah.
just different. Life moving in a different way. Um, but yeah, even if it's challenging in a moment, right? Even if there is that anxiety, that self-consciousness of, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? We can always find comfort in the gift that is being able to even ask that question, right? To even be preoccupied in that particular way. Because to respond to this call that life gives itself is is truly a blessing, no matter how it unfolds, no matter what it looks like.
Mm, yeah. It's so funny. It kind of occurs to me that the reason why, non-dual, not two, as opposed to oneness, because it's so easy to be able to see the movement and then to have ourselves watching the movement and not realize that we are that movement. We are that movement. And wholeness isn't some spiritual platitude. It's uh it's not feeling good all the time either. It's a recognition that goes beyond. I was going to finish that sentence, but it kind of stopped itself and made sense.
Yeah.
It's a recognition that just goes beyond anything and everything. Mm.
I feel like whenever, this comes up sometimes in session where there's a particular kind of expectation or assumption of what recognizing the truth of what we are
Mm.
would look like or feel like.
Or that something would happen, right?
Right. Yeah. Some sort of permanent state, which is funny, but understandable. Um, it's almost like I end up having the conversation of, well, what, in the most honest consideration of this, what would you rather life be like? This uh, ecstatic, only good feelings all the time, or the ability, the capacity to, with full heartfulness, appreciate and honor every aspect of life as it happens. In truth, every aspect of yourself as it arises and moves, right? What would be more nourishing? What would be more fulfilling? An endless orgasm or just being and being able to celebrate and embrace, deeply love beyond the conditional definition of love. Every texture of life as it arises. To be able to say thank you after every breath with complete conviction in that, with complete honesty, feeling that fully. Thank you.
Mm.
What do we want more? I think if we stop and tell ourselves the truth, it's the latter, right?
Yeah.
It really is. It's the mind, the ego, the sense of separation that wants this kind of endless positive. But really, the reason that that is the case is so that it doesn't have to acknowledge the discomfort of living from self-centeredness.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's coming to see the safety in the movement in the
Mm-hmm.
truest sense. You can't mess this one up. It's okay. I think trying to make ourselves okay from the idea that we won't feel uncomfortable sometimes or that things can't happen to our body or whatever, like that's good luck. That's like so yeah, like seeing the real what safety and security really means. And coming as I see it to see when you spoke about love, like, it seems very as I now think about unconditional love, it's just for me, it's just the acknowledging that what is.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we have this idea that, I don't know, we have an idea that whatever somebody may see unconditional love as, or, but to me, yeah, it's what is. And to see that we the us that thinks that we're in charge of the movement, oh boy, like it's a lot to carry that. So yeah, I'm with you. To me, that thank you is yeah, it's coming to see this. It's coming to recognize what the words non-duality really point to, rather than trying to cultivate a sense of gratitude by waking up in the morning and writing 50 things that you're grateful for. It's coming to see the deep um, to see through the illusion of separation, and just to see what an incredible gift it is to that we find ourselves here, man.
Mm-hmm.
How cool that we find ourselves here together. And I don't know, I feel very yeah, I feel very, it really simplifies things. It really does. It
Mm-hmm.
really does. It really simplifies things to come to see this.
Yeah.
So ultimately, bypassing is well, is there such a thing, or is there just something appearing that we interpret in a certain way? The idea that we could bypass something ultimately would feed into the idea that there is a separate self there that's doing something. in that way. So I think it's I think maybe for some people it's like a helpful way to kind of look at things in the relative, but ultimately it's, as you say, it's a movement, and just us just being able to trust that.
Yeah, as as long as we everybody's doing their best, right?
Sure. Yeah,
And
no doubt.
I think just in my own life, so to speak, my own process, just making sure that I, as best I can in each moment, lean into those qualities of openness and willingness
Mm.
and honesty, and the rest takes care of itself, right? You can't go wrong ever. And when when we're seeing from what we are rather than from what we're not,
Mm.
it makes a difference, you know. But sometimes we need that little nudge, that little that invitation of, hmm, there's something inherently uncomfortable about this
Mm.
position, this perspective. Let me look at that. And if I can't look at that, if I don't want to look at that, let me look at why I don't want to look at that. And just try, right? Don't
Mm.
have to get it right. Don't have to experience some sort of outcome in that process. Just try and see what happens.
Yeah, dude, there's so many directions that we could go. There's so many seeming paradoxes that to explore. So that would be really cool to do that. I'm aware of time. So
Mm-hmm.
somehow that hour has disappeared again. This seems to happen when we
Mm-hmm.
get chatting and hold space with each other. It's Yeah, thanks for that. It's really lovely. Like more than any of the words, but more than any of the words, like it's just really lovely to kind of uh honor the movement with you in this moment, to kind of just be in the feeling, for lack of a better term,
Mm-hmm.
of the conversation. I feel it really yeah, I feel like I'm kind of deep beneath the waves with you. It's how I
Mm-hmm.
kind of, the metaphor I like to use. It kind of feels very kind of like quiet and
Yeah.
connected.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, you're welcome, brother. Good to see you.
Mm.
Mm.